All right, Dr. Kevin Shannon, could you please discuss a little bit about your involvement, your lab's involvement with the NF Preclinical Consortium?
Yeah, so I think the NFPC, or the Preclinical Consortium, was the logical kind of outcome of all of the hard work that many scientists in the field have done to engineer and develop mouse models of NF1 that accurately reconstitute the diseases that we see in patients. And one can use those mice for a lot of different reasons. One very important function is to kind of understand the biochemistry of the disease and what molecules are important. But another important thing we can do is we can test drugs and ideas in the mice much more quickly and in a more controlled way than we can in human patients. So we can, based on our knowledge and understanding of the disease processes, we can hypothesize that a particular drug that interferes with a particular protein in the cell might actually improve an NF-associated complication like leukemia or a plexiform tumor or a cutaneous tumor. And we can test those ideas, and one of the things we can do in the mice that's really difficult to do in people is to test combinations, so two drugs at the same time. And so I think what we can sort of do for our clinical colleagues is come up with new ideas, new drugs that might work, and help them to prioritize what things might help NF patients. The way the NFPC works is that different groups write grant applications. There's a very careful and thorough peer review process. And then after the group gets started, we meet twice a year and also have monthly phone conference calls. It's very much organized on an industry basis of taking a particular problem or project and seeing it all the way through to the end with milestones. And in fact, we have a very good external advisory board, and it's primarily comprised of people from industry or with an industry background. Particularly Jay Gibbs from AstraZeneca is the chair of that, and Gideon Bolag from Plexicon, and Sarah Kortnage, and now at the Burnham Institute, Mike Moran, who's been at Pfizer. So people who really understand how do you test drugs, how do you bring them to patients, and that's really the goal of all this.
Excellent. Could you discuss a little bit, so we have just come to the completion of phase 1 of our NFPC. Could you kind of talk about some of the results from that and some of the expectations, hopes, I guess, coming forward?
Yeah, so I think the phase 1. I think one of the things that we all understand is that these sorts of things are learning curves. That most scientists like myself who generate these models are mostly interested in the molecular biology and the biochemistry, and think a little bit less about actual therapeutics. And when we're in academic labs, we tend to think about therapeutics a little differently than in drug companies, where they're very concerned about how much drug is actually in the blood and how much is getting to the tissue, and we think a little bit less about that. So those kinds of things were things we had to do on sort of a learning curve. And then in addition, I think it takes a certain amount of time and effort to negotiate between the foundation, the individual institutions, universities, and the drug companies, appropriate material transfers agreements and terms to pass these compounds and distribute them widely and make them available, because we're mostly interested in drugs that really are going into patients, and of course the companies have a strong proprietary interest in those drugs, and so there's obviously, once the lawyers get involved, it always takes longer, and so that's been a bit of a frustration for us, but certainly it's been largely resolved. There's been a lot of effort on the side of the foundation, particularly Kim and Mila Makura really working very hard with the drug companies, and a lot of goodwill, and so we've been able to get from drug companies good drugs to test. We've figured out a good way to do it. I think the external advisory board has given us a lot of guidance. They've been very rigorous in evaluating the progress of the different groups, and in the current NFPC, of the initial 5 groups, 3 are returning, and 1 new group has come in. So they've been very careful to try to invest the funds of the foundation pretty wisely and set a high bar for who's going to be in the NFPC. I think what we'll see in the next iteration is a lot more drugs tested, and I think we'll see a lot more ideas going to the clinicians, and we're already beginning to hear about that at this meeting.
Exactly what we're looking for. All right, thank you, sir, very much.